guys, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you did watch my last video, or if you are coming on here from my TikTok page. I had to make a YouTube channel because the research that I've been doing is just too extensive not to make a YouTube channel. So I went ahead and listened to you guys, and so this will be the first video of my Sons of God series. So today's episode is a little bit of a controversial topic. It starts with my theory of, it's basically a theory that I have come up with based on my research of the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees and our Bible, along with extensive information that I have been putting together about the Sumerian and Canaanite gods. So again, this is about the Sumerian and Canaanite gods being connected to the very sons of Noah. I have spent some time copiously researching the comparisons of these two pantheons along with a few others, but today I will be focusing on these two pantheons. I believe that these two pantheons were created by the two sons of Ham, who was the son of Noah, and those two sons were Cush and Canaan. I believe that for a few reasons, and I want to list them really quickly, or just a few of them really quickly here before I get into the meat and potatoes. Reason number one would be that they all have the common theme of a flood occurring or going to occur in their pantheons. Every single one of them talks about a very life-changing and earth-altering flood. These two pantheons, by the way, are the earliest recorded religions in the world, according to Wikipedia. So I am going all the way back to the beginning of human history here. For anybody who is a fan of Ancient Aliens, you might know what I am talking about. And so another reason that I really believe that they are all connected is that they have the same conflicts, the same character types. They fight with each other for the same reasons, and in the same way they battle, and there's almost the same result in both pantheons. And that's what kind of caused me to even look into this in the first place, because there were so many comparisons with the not only the themes but also with the conflicts within these pantheons and how they relate to each other. So instead of continuing with my short list, I am going to go ahead and just get into the nitty-gritty. The Book of Jubilees gives you exact dates and exact times when things happen. And all of these things that are mentioned in the Book of Jubilees are in our Bible. It's almost like whomever wrote these books had extensive information about these smaller details in the Book of Genesis. So think of the Book of Jubilees as a map for time. So I've basically just made my own timeline based off of the Book of Jubilees, and that's what you're seeing here. And so from there, you can see that Adam was born on year 0 and he lived 975 years. And so then you go on to his descendants, which would be Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, and Jared. And something interesting happens at this point in the book. It mentions that in the days of Jared, the Watcher angels took wives. This same thing is repeated in the book of Genesis 6, and is also repeated in the book of Enoch. And so I believe that this is a true thing that happened, especially that it is in our canonized text. So they just go into detail of when these angels mated with women, and they go into detail on how long things went on. And so when these watchers took wives, the very first generation of children that they came out with was called the nephilim species. Again, first generation angel-human hybrids that then produced nephilim, which is the more common use for angel-human hybrid types. But there also was a third generation called the Eljo, which could be more commonly referred to as giants. The book further goes on to mention that during these days, the war among these nephilim that God begins happens, and God does this because he is punishing the watcher angels for making something out of his very own creation. They make their own offspring that is outside of what God planned for creation, and so God has to end this very vicious, very violent species that has now come upon the earth. And so he does that by causing them all to turn on each other, slaying each other by the power of his word, which is described as a sword, which I believe is another connotation to Jesus Christ. And this war is depicted in most of these pantheons further than even just the Sumerian and Canaanite pantheons. It is seen commonly in Greek pantheons and even some African pantheons, but this war we'll just call the Clash of Titans. I didn't come up with that myself. That was Rob Skiba, and I'll take that from him because he did find that Hollywood was telling us the truth in certain instances, and maybe this was one of them, that they were describing the war between the Nephilim generation against themselves. And so that would describe the, again, Clash of Titans, or the war of the primordial gods of these other pantheons. After God punishes the Watchers by causing their children to kill each other, he goes ahead and banishes them to Tartarus. He binds them and banishes them into Tartarus, meaning that they are now stuck in Tartarus and cannot come back for a second incursion. It would be impossible for them to have left Tartarus to then go to Earth and repopulate for more giants to be made. So this proves a certain point that I have to make here. So who is alive after the flood in order to create new giants? Here on the rest of the timeline, you see that after you have Jared, he then begat Enoch, the famous Enoch, who was raptured at only 365 years old, which was very young for that time. He was a favorite of God's, and so he was raptured before his long life. Then we have Methuselah, Lamech, and finally Noah. Noah has his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth 100 years before the flood even happens. Now, God mentions two very specific details just before Noah is taken up into the ark. He mentions that all flesh is corrupt, meaning all flesh except for Noah, his wife, and his sons. And he also mentions that he is going to shorten the lives of men to 120 years. Going back to all flesh being corrupt, to me, that means that anyone besides Noah, his wife, and his sons were genetically corrupt. And so that means that it had to have come from Noah's sons' wives. Noah's sons' wives would be the only ones to be able to carry that Nephilim DNA into the post-flood world genealogy. Now, God does say he is going to shorten the lifespan of men to 120 years. And he says this after Ham, Shem, and Japheth are already 100 years old just before the flood. So that would mean that Ham, Shem, and Japheth's offsprings should be no older than 120 years per se, right? Well, let's take a look at how long they lived. So you see Japheth, who lived 600 years because, again, he was born before God takes away his nephesh. But you see his sons, Gomer lives 180 years and Tiras lives 120 years. Normal. Pretty standard. Then we have Shem. Shem lives 600 years. Again, similar to his brother because they were the same generation. But then you see his sons. His son Arphaxad was actually able to live to 438 years old, and his son Lud was also able to live a similar lifespan, reaching 420 years. Now again, if God said that men should live 120 years, how do we have these men living to be 400 years old? Well, let's continue because it gets better. Then we see Ham. We see Ham, who lives 400 years, a little young. He dies a little younger than his brothers, but still lives a very extensive life compared to what his sons should have lived. But his sons live almost double his age. His first son, Cush, ends up living 950 years. Mizraim lives about 600 years. Canaan lives 750 years. And his second oldest son, Put, does only live 100 years, but I have a further theory on that, and I'll discuss that later on. So let's go back. If God said that he was shortening man's days to 120 years just before the flood, just before Noah's grandsons are born, how can it be that most of them live to be over 400 years old? Specifically Shem and Ham's sons. Japheth and his sons seem to be the only line that follows what God said. So does that mean that God lied? No, absolutely not. That just gives me the indication that Nila, or aka Ham's wife, and possibly Shem's wife, have Nephilim DNA within them. And judging by the ages of both of these sets of grandsons, I definitely would say that Shem's wife was less Nephilim than Ham's wife, because Ham's wife seemed to have produced the longest lasting and most angel-like offspring. So further along in the book, you see that Noah divides the land between his sons by drawing lots. Ham then separates himself and his kin from Noah and his brothers, and Canaan, Ham's son, further curses himself by stealing land from his uncle Shem, which the land would later come to be known as Israel. So it describes a date for the start of the war of the sons of Noah, and this war, which involves the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, begins in the third generation after the flood, again, which would place this war roughly between 100 and 200 years after Canaan's curse. This is part of the larger story of the spread of humanity and the establishment of various nations from Noah's family. If we believe the infallible word of God, we know that these were the men who populated the earth. It states how nation came against nation, city against city, and man against man, aka nations being Noah's sons, cities being their sons, etc., etc. So something interesting that I noticed on the timeline of the ages of the sons of Ham was that Put, having only lived 100 years, a very short time compared to his brothers, he died right at the start of the war. So it made me wonder whether Put was killed, possibly by his brother, possibly by the brother who has been cursed and has caused many familial issues. I believe that Canaan killed his brother Put, and that may have been what started this war of the sons of Noah. And I feel like my theory is further proven when you see the story of these brothers told from the perspectives of the Canaanite and Sumerian gods, which ultimately were Canaan and Cush's families, all of them making themselves into gods and goddesses and forsaking the one true God, Yahweh. So Noah reminds his sons before the war about the kind of behaviors that caused the flood in the first place. He warns them to guard their souls against fornication, causing Nephilim to overrun the world and fill it with evil. Again, fornication was the whole reason God had to flood the earth, because angels decided that they were going to create out of their own. Noah was warning them about the way that they were to populate the earth. Now, a couple of chapters back, you see in Jubilees, in the family tree of these sons of Adam, you find that there's a pattern. All men found wives who were the daughter of their father's brother. So they would marry their third cousins. And biologically today, we know that third cousins can marry and have children and have zero genetic issues. But after Ham leaves Noah and his brothers, Ham's sons are left to commingle close DNA, keeping the Nephilim DNA that comes from their mother or Ham's wife within their side of the family as much as possible. Now you might be wondering, what does having Nephilim DNA make you look like? Well, most angels that are human-like are depicted as beautiful, and specifically the Watcher class angels were the most human-like in appearance. It wasn't hard for them to convince the women to mate with them. I mean, they were beautiful and they had magic, so manipulation certainly wasn't a problem for them. They were massive creatures, they towered over men, and they showed their superiority with their massive size. And so their offspring would naturally be large people, or large looking at the very least, taller than a regular man. You would think that they would also be very beautiful because they were part angel, making them almost irresistible to look at, and also irresistible in the way that someone could probably, I don't know, worship them. So this offspring that comes from Noah directly, which would be Ham's sons, these men are very much angel-like men. They are beautiful, they are large, they are wise, they know magic, most likely from their mother who brought it with her on the ark and showed them. All of these things put together, and you have the perfect formula for making yourself a god in the eyes of mortals, or men who only live to be 120 years old. I believe that these men, Cush, Mizraim, and Canaan, because Put died too young to become a god, I believe that these men made themselves gods and created their own respective religions once they separated from each other. I believe that they tell a tale of familial issues, fornication, and magic, and it's quite a wild ride. So I hope that you stick around and see what I connected. So a couple of common themes here in both these brothers' pantheons, and again, we're talking about Sumerian and Canaanite pantheons for today's video. In both pantheons, you see primordial gods showing water or chaos, and also a primordial god of air and atmosphere. To me, both embody the atmosphere or the firmament that God made and the waters that God had to separate in order to make earth and sky. There are also father and mother gods, and then finally you have the main group of gods that are most commonly recorded. And again, like I mentioned before, they have the same conflicts with the same character types in both pantheons. And the most important thing is that they all mention the flood. Sumerian folklore actually has a very detailed depiction of the flood and has certain characters that I want you to pay attention to that I will explain later on in the video. So again, we see Ham and Nila. Her name is Nila Tamaok, but we're going to call her Nila for short. And so we see from this couple, we get 4 sons, and we're going to focus on Cush for now because he is the creator of the Sumerian pantheon. Cush is also the oldest son, and his religion is the oldest recorded religion according to Wikipedia. It's also placed within his land, the land that he is given by his father, so it only makes sense that this would be his pantheon. So the Sumerian pantheon is commonly referred to as the Anunnaki or the Anunnaki. So if you like Ancient Aliens, you probably know exactly who I am talking about when I say that the Anunnaki would be from Cush. So within this pantheon, you have the primordial gods, Apsu and Tiamat. Apsu is the air and atmosphere god, and that is the representation of the firmament that God created. And then you have Tiamat, who was the representation of the waters that God separated, or chaos as well. Cush even goes so far as to include his grandparents, Noah and Naamah, through the first generation mother and father gods, Anshar and Kishar. Seems like Cush still respects Noah to some extent, but we'll see. Then you have the second generation of mother and father gods. Anu, the father god, who is a representation of Ham, and Ki, which is the mother goddess representing Nila. And by those two, you then have Anunnaki. Then their offspring are the main offspring, the main group pantheon here. And we will begin with Enki. Enki is the god of water and sea, knowledge and creation associated with crafts and magic. And this is the protagonist of this pantheon. This is Kush. Kush puts himself right at the center of his pantheon, being the god of knowledge and creation, as well as the sea, which is fitting because Kush's land was on the shore. Is depicted as resourceful and intelligent. He's often known for having wisdom to solve problems and sometimes acts as a mediator between the gods and humanity. His actions frequently focus on protecting humanity and ensuring their survival, which really, it wasn't the survival of all of humanity, it was more just the survival of his own kingdom. And then we have Enlil, the god of air, wind, and storms, representing Canaan. This is the antagonist in this pantheon. He is the stern but powerful and authoritative god. He's depicted as a god who enforces cosmic and divine law, and sometimes harshly if needed. And his decisions carry out great weight, including those that affect humanity. And Enlil's relationship with humanity is kind of more distant and less sympathetic than Enki's, and it's portrayed that way here. And he's actually threatens to annihilate humanity with another flood, if you can believe that. So in this pantheon, you see the dispute between Kush and Canaan already from the beginning, and you see this from Kush's perspective. So we will touch on that. Then we have Inanna, or Ishtar, as she's referred to in our Bible, the goddess of love, sexual energy, war, and fertility. We do not have a family member to connect her to in the Bible or extra biblical texts because they only speak about the men, but we do see Ishtar in Ezekiel and the influence that she has over the people of this area. We also have Ninsun, the goddess of motherhood, nurturing, wisdom, divination, and we see her in the Bible as Anath, and she is called Anath in the Canaanite pantheon. So she is mentioned as a very important figure as the mother of Shamgar. His name is Shamgar ben Anath. And this is Gilgamesh, for anybody who was wondering. We'll get into that in a little bit later, but he is mentioned in the book of Judges, and he is there to help the Israelite people. And then we have the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, who represents Sheol personified, and no representation of the brother Cush. Could it be because he died so young before the war, or just there wasn't enough story to tell about him? So within this pantheon, we see that the main gods are always direct descendants of Anu and Ki, or Ham and Nila. And all these gods play significant roles in the story being told. There are many, many gods in this pantheon. I am focusing on the ones that are mentioned biblically and the ones that have been recorded in history the most. So it seems as though Ki had children with all of her sons. It may have been to keep her Nephilim blood strong within her family, keeping them godlike, or as godlike as possible through the generations. So you see here that she and Enki, or Cush, produce Marduk, or Nimrod. She and Enlil, or Canaan, produce Nergal, or Heth, and Ninurta, or Sidon. Then we have siblings mating with siblings, and their offspring would be Enki, or Cush, having a child with Ninsun, or Anat, producing the famous Tammuz, the same Tammuz that is mentioned within the story of Inanna, or Ishtar. So Tammuz is from the book of Ezekiel, and eventually he does become the lover of his aunt Inanna. There is a tragedy to the end of that story, but we'll get into that later. And then we have Ninsun, and also known as Anat, and Ludgalbanda, producing Gilgamesh. Now, a funny thing here is that Ninsun, Ludgalbanda, and Gilgamesh are very important details to remember when seeing the Sumerian pantheon, because it further connects my theory that these men were all connected to Noah. Because Ninsun, while she is the offspring of Anu and Ki, Ludgalbanda, in his own theories, is someone completely different, and we'll see who he is in a moment. So the story of Ninsun, Ludgalbanda, and Gilgamesh is a fundamental part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, giving context to Gilgamesh's nature as a semi-divine hero and king. His relationship with his divine mother and heroic father shapes his journey, both in terms of powers he inherits and the challenges he faces. The influence of Ninsun's wisdom and Ludgalbanda's legacy of heroism permeates Gilgamesh's actions and decisions throughout the epic, contributing to his eventual realization about the nature of life and death and the importance of living a meaningful life despite the inevitability of death. So about Ninsun, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, she is depicted as a wise and caring mother who has a significant role in Gilgamesh's life. Her divine nature explains Gilgamesh's extraordinary qualities, such as strength and wisdom. Now, Ninsun is known as Lady Wild Cow. She's known that way because of her demeanor. She is very demure, she is very caring and nurturing. She treats people the way that a mother cow treats her calves. She's also depicted in other pantheons as sheep-like, very docile, very kind, very honorable. And now a little bit about Lud, or Ludgalbanda, is that he's portrayed as a former king of Uruk and a hero in his own right. He's depicted as a powerful figure who is revered for his strength and wisdom. However, he is a human. He has achieved some kind of semi-divine status, but he is human for the most part, or at least that's how he is depicted in this folklore. But unlike most scholars, I don't believe him to be Ludim from the line of Mizraim. You see here on this timeline, Mizraim has a son named Ludim. But on this same timeline, Shem has a son named Lud. On the map, it shows that Lud actually didn't settle even where his father settled. He settled way up where his uncle's sons settled, and so this tells me that he was a traveler. And also in the same lore as him being Ludgalbanda, he is seen as a traveler. He is seen as a king that travels and conquers and brings back many trophies. And that might have attributed to the reason for Ninsun falling in love with this not as divine man, because Little Miss Innocent over here liked the hero of the story, and so ended up having Gilgamesh. A little bit more about Gilgamesh. Again, he is 1/3 divine in this folklore. He knows that he's not going to live as long as his mother and father. He knows that his father has lived an extremely long time, and so he goes to a character named Utnapishtim. Now, Utnapishtim is an interesting character because he is the one who is said to have survived the flood. And again, this is interesting because we are going to see yet another depiction of Noah. We're going to see Noah as another type of character here. He's not only a god, but he's also an actual person by the accounts of Gilgamesh. Utnapishtim literally means he who saw or he who found life. And it is said that he lived pre-flood, and he was the son of Ubaratutu. Ubaratutu means the one who is granted or given life. And then he was the son of Enmendurana. Enmendurana, Lord of the good city. So Utnapishtim would be Noah, he who found life, because he found life after the flood. And then Ubaratutu would be the one who is granted life because Mahalalel lived longer than Noah did. And then Enmendurana would be Enoch. Enmendurana, Enoch, would be the Lord of the good city, or the man who would have seen heaven and was taken up to heaven multiple times and shown the good city. Gilgamesh also describes how he is searching for that eternal life, just like his mother and father to some degree. And we know that he is also depicted as Shamgar in our Bible. In the book of Judges, the Shamgar, the son of Anath, or Ben Anath. As Shamgar, he helps the Israelites by saving them from a 600-man army of Philistines. And again, if you know anything about the Philistines, they were giants, or at least they were seemingly giant. And as Gilgamesh, he saves them from the bull of heaven that Ishtar sends, because Ishtar was actually rejected by Gilgamesh because he rebukes her. He rebukes her because he tells her that he knows exactly what happens to her consorts, aka Tammuz, who ended up dying because she was so jealous of the love that the people had for him as a god. And so she coups against him, has him killed on a hunting party by a boar, and then repents of it and tries to resurrect him. And so we see a lot of different connections from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Sumerian pantheon. Again, these same connections come up in our Bible and in the Canaanite pantheon. Now let's switch over to the Canaanite pantheon and see what we can connect from that end. So in this pantheon, the story unfolds, of course, from the perspective of Canaan. Remember that he was the cursed man of the family. He was the black sheep. He was cursed not only by Noah, but by his own father, Ham, and his brothers. Noah curses him because of something that Ham did, but Ham, Cush, Put, and Mizraim curse him further for stealing land that wasn't his to take. So keep these things in mind when looking at this group of gods and the conflicts that arise within this pantheon. So he takes the concept that the one true God created the world and misconstrues it just like Cush does. And he creates primordial gods out of atmosphere and space, kind of the same way that Cush does, and makes it so that it wasn't that God created those things, but that those things themselves were gods. He, unlike Cush, does not represent Noah and Nema in his pantheon, and we can all imagine why. Instead, he replaces the mother and father gods with just El and Asherah, which would be his representation of Ham and Nila. And the god of water and chaos is Yam. And Yam is in the Semitic language, and it means sea. Just like how Cush is the god of the sea in his pantheon, he is also the god of the sea in Canaan's pantheon, and he is also the god of chaos in this pantheon. Keep that in mind. So he is the antagonist of this story. Meanwhile, Canaan depicts himself as a main god, the protagonist of the bunch, as Baal. Notice the double A in the names. That kind of made me take a step back. But he is also the god of storms in this pantheon. Just like how Enlil is the god of storms in the Sumerian pantheon, he is the god of storms here as Canaan. However, in this version, he depicts himself as a young and youthful god versus an older, more wise god in Cush's pantheon. Here we see Mot as the representation of Put, which is necessary for Baal or Canaan to have in this pantheon, because they later have a conflict that is a huge part of the story or the lore in this pantheon. Even though Ereshkigal is the personification of Sheol, or the personification of hell or Tartarus, you see Canaan represent hell or the underworld in a different way. It's more like an actual place, and then Mot is not the god of this place, more like the resident king of this place. Which leads me to wonder, they must have had some kind of true conflict in real life that ended in Put being killed by Canaan and being represented by death in both. So in the conflict between Baal or Canaan and Mot or Put, you see that they battle, and Mot or Put is killed and Baal or Canaan is simply injured and then resurrected by his sister Anat. The more likely story is that he and his brother got into a fatal battle, and Canaan was able to survive with some severe injuries but still recovered, versus Put not being able to recover and ultimately passing away. Canaan also doesn't have the best luck with mating because he does not have any children with his sisters. Rather, he has only children with his mother. Both pantheons show this pattern, and so it definitely connects just the same as Cush's pantheon. Funny enough, Anat or Ninsun again is his sister in this pantheon, just like in the other pantheons, and she helps him not to die. But his wife, or his estranged wife, Astarte or Inanna, is nowhere to be found. She's actually never has any children by him, according to both pantheons. And she even goes as far as being known for promiscuity and having many lovers, including Tammuz and the whole story of his resurrection. We have Inanna as Astarte in this pantheon. She is still the goddess of war and love, and she is linked to fertility and the divine feminine or feminine sexuality. Probably because of her affairs and all of her known consorts, she had many lovers. Canaan also has his own version of Ninsun, the goddess of wisdom, and he depicts her as Anat. However, he depicts her more as a warrior than a mother, because technically in his story, she helps him to resurrect, but she has no children by him, so he depicts her more as a warrior and not so much as a mother. And again, we know that this is Anath because of the story of Shamgar, aka Gilgamesh. And then you also see that there's a similar conflict to Cush's pantheon, where Baal or Canaan and Yam or Cush have a conflict, just like Enki and Enlil have a conflict. And both conflicts are seen as basically a fight for the right to be the king of the gods. And in one pantheon, Cush wins, and in the other pantheon, Canaan wins. Again, so Yam seeks to expand his dominion and assert his rule over the gods, and he demands that all the other gods acknowledge his rule, specifically Baal. And so they get into a fight, and obviously in this pantheon, Baal wins. Also similarly to the other pantheon, Yam also threatens to flood the earth yet again. But instead of Canaan being the one threatening to flood the earth, it would be Cush that is threatening to flood the earth, and the other man is coming to rescue humanity. All right, guys, so far that is what I have, and that is what I believe. I truly think that there was a reason for God introducing me to Rob Skiba's videos, who I used so much for most of my research, and I tried my best to not copyright any of his information, but still try to be as true to the history and as true to the Bible and or extra biblical text as possible. If you like this kind of content and would like to know a little more, please comment down below, subscribe if you like things like this. I will be talking about all kinds of pantheons, and I will be talking about all the connections between God, our God, the God of the universe, and how all of these pantheons are just demonic versions of the ultimate fight between the sons of Noah.